Hey everybody, welcome back to Lunch with PB&J. This would be now episode 39.
Ooh, 39.
We're coming up on 40 here in a little bit. We'll be at 50 before the end of the year.
I'm feeling old.
I think we should do something awesome for episode 50. Maybe we'll give something away.
Oh, that's a good idea.
I don't know what it would be, but we'll figure something out. But anyway, episode 39 right now, and we are continuing where we left off in the parable of the prodigal son. So last week we talked about the lost sheep and the lost coin, and then Jesus says, hey, listen, I got one more way of explaining this to you, so let me talk about that. And he starts to tell this story of a father with two sons, and the one son comes to him and says, hey, Dad, I want you to give me all my inheritance now, virtually saying, I wish you were dead, so give me my money. And so he goes out and he blows it all on wild living. Later on, his brother gives a little better picture of it and says he spent it all on prostitutes and partying and just going out there and
his brother know that?
living life, all right? And we just talked about how that's really a picture of what we do when we choose to walk away from God. What we're saying is, I don't want to wait for my eternal inheritance. I want to live a good life now. I want to live a life that I think is pleasing and pleasurable now. And we will often trade in what God has in store for us for what Hebrews calls the fleeting pleasures of sin. And so this son, he goes out there, he blows all his money, he ends up feeding pigs for somebody else, which is the lowest job you could have as a young Jewish man. Here he is slopping food for pigs, and he recognizes even the worst position in my father's household is living a better life than I am. And so I'm going home. I'm going to go home and I'm going to tell my dad, listen, I know that I've sinned against you. I know that I've sinned against God. I'm sorry. Let me come home. Not as a son. I'm not worthy to be your son, but let me come home as a servant. And that was where we left off last week. Anything else you want to recap there? No? Good?
Yeah.
All right. Then we are going to jump in right there where we left off, verse 20. It says, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. I'm going to take this a couple verses at a time because this is powerful.
Yes.
Because we talked about last week as well that in the parable of the lost sheep and lost coin, the individuals who lost those things, the shepherd and this woman with the 10 coins, they actively went and were searching for the item that was lost. In the story of the prodigal son, the son chooses, he makes a conscious decision that I'm leaving home, and the father lets him go. The father allows him to practice his free will to choose to walk away. And we even talked about that last week of how sometimes that's what we have to do with people that we love.
Yes.
Is we have to let them make those choices that as excruciating as hard as they are. Sometimes that's what's needed for them to realize what they're missing, what they're doing is wrong. And that's what sin does. Sin will humble us and bring us to this place. But what I love about this is that it says while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. And what this does for me is it gives me this picture. Every time I read this story, I get this picture of a dad getting up every morning early and walking out, I don't know if they did this back then, but making a cup of coffee, going out on the front porch, and just as he drank his morning cup of coffee, just standing on the front porch and looking down the road. Just looking down the driveway, looking across the fields, and just waiting. Just waiting for that son to come. Because it says, while he was a long way off, the father saw him coming.
Yeah.
The father never gave up. That's the picture that I get. The father never gave up hope. He never gave up looking for the son. Even though he didn't go out and actively was searching, he was there, he was waiting, and he was looking.
Yeah.
He was looking every day. He never gave up hope.
I think that speaks to where we have to put ourselves spiritually, is this place of faith. Faith says, I walk by faith and not by sight. I walk in the faith of knowing God's in control. And so when we put our prayers for our loved ones to God, and we're surrendering them to God, and we're praying, I think about just that, having that faith to see them coming, you know, and not by just looking at what we see in the natural, but having the faith, because, you know, as you're talking about just that father standing on the porch just looking, I just think about like the prayers of parents, the prayers of, you know, grandmothers, the prayers of, and it's they're searching, they're looking, they're waiting, we're anticipating something to happen, you know, and it's just, to me, it's that act of faith.
Yeah. And even, and it's also, it's that idea of just, I think some people feel like, you know, God abandons them. Yeah. And I think for some people, they just feel like, well, God abandoned me, you know, so what kind of a father is he? He's a neglectful father. He abandoned me. And here I think we get this picture again of this father that didn't abandon the son, but he allowed the son to make his own choice. Yeah. But then the father never stopped watching for the son. Right. And I believe that God is always watching out for us. Yeah. I believe that God is always watching us. He's always aware of where we are. I think of the Psalm of David where he says, even if I make my bed in the depths of hell, behold, you are there with me. Right. And it's this thing of David said, like, I can't get away from you. Even when I try to get away from you, I can't get away from you. No matter what I do, no matter where I go, you never stop watching me. You are always watching me. And I think that's what I see in this father, is that he is a father that comes out every morning and he looks. Is today the day my son comes home? Is today the day my daughter comes home? And I think for a parent that's maybe going through something with their kids, where you just wonder, are my kids ever going to come back? You know, God knows your heart. He knows what you're going through, because he experiences that with every single one of us. Until we come back to him, God watches for every day. God gets up, and I believe, not that he ever goes to sleep. Don't misunderstand me. Ben thinks God sleeps. But every day, the heart of God is today the day that my son comes home. It's today the day my daughter comes home. It's today the day that I'm going to be reunited with the kids that have chosen to walk away from me. Yeah.
And again, we talked about it a little bit last week, but it's that, again, we're seeing where, you know, with the sheep, he went after the sheep to look for the sheep. With the coin, she sweeps the floor and she searches this coin. And with this, you're not seeing him, you know, actively like go out. But what you are seeing is you're still seeing a pursuit. You're still seeing the father's heart seeking that son, so much so that he catches him before anybody else. The father notices him coming before anybody else, not a servant, not the other brother. The father notices him coming. Why? Because he's watching for him. He's waiting for him. He's anticipating.
And I love that. We have no idea how long the son was gone for. Yeah. We don't know the time period here. But I even think, you know, just a long way off.
Yeah. What does that mean?
A long way off. We don't know what that distance looks like, but a long way off, he knew it was his son.
Yeah. Gives me chills.
He recognizes his son from a long way off. And I just think that's it. God knows you.
And you just feel like we're talking about an illustrated story, and I'm getting chills thinking about it, because I'm just envisioning the excitement rising up in this father as he sees, that's my son, and then to the point where, I don't know if you read it or not but to the point where he's about to run.
So his reaction is filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said, Father, he love and compassion. This is what the father is, filled with love and compassion. Yeah. And he ran to his son and embraced him. Listen, that was unheard of in that time, for the position that this father was in, to have that kind of wealth, to have all these servants, to have this kind of status that he would have had to kind of fit into this story. These guys didn't run. They had people run for them, right? Like he didn't. But it's also that filled with love and compassion. Like,
shows he's not holding a grudge.
There's no grudge there. Yeah. There's nothing held against us, and there's no offense there. Yeah. There's nothing. There's nothing but love and compassion that he runs to the son. It's like in that moment, everything is unspoken. To the father, everything is unspoken. Like the very fact that his son came home, That's why every day, I get this picture, every day he's out there and he's just waiting for it, because he knows if my son ever walks back here, I know he's back. I know he's coming back. I know he's coming home again. Yeah. Right? And so this father is just filled with love and compassion, and he runs to his son and he embraces him and he kisses him. And then it goes on and says, his son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But then look at the father's response, verse 22. But his father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So the party began.
The party began. There's parties in all three of these. Have you noticed that? Celebrations.
And so again, you get this picture where I just love that the son comes with his prepared speech. Yeah. Hat in hand, head down, remorseful, repentant, humbled, and just with his rehearsed speech of, Father, I've said exactly what he said he was going to say, and the dad doesn't even acknowledge him. Right. I love it. Yeah. The dad doesn't even acknowledge it.
Because there could be, I'm just thinking about in today's, there could be just, okay, you're going to go through probation time. We're going to put you 6 months probation to see if you...
Yeah, we'll see if you're serious.
You know. But the father doesn't even entertain any of that.
No. It's just an immediate acceptance.
Yeah. It's quick. Go get the robe, and it's that father. It's just, again, it's the father's response. And so in breaking these three things down, it just shows me that I think more than anything what I got out of it, because you have the robe, the ring, and the shoes. And I'll let Ben go through and break down what each of these mean. But I think what I saw is this thing of, so the son says, I'll come and be your hired servant. Okay, that's what he's willing to do. I'll come and be your hired servant. The father doesn't even, again, there's no animosity, there's no bitterness, there's no anything. He just goes directly into, quick, go get these gifts for my son. My son has come home. We're going to celebrate. Go get these gifts. And I think what you see is these are all gifts that were given to him as a son. They weren't given, he's like not accepting. The father's not, no, you're not going to be my servant. Yeah. You're my son. And so obviously it's like, this is how it is with our relationship with God. Yes, we serve God, but we are his sons and daughters, and that's why we serve him. We're not we're not first his servant, and then we're allowed to be his son and daughter. It's like it's in order. We are his sons and daughters, and then we serve him. And it's just, you get these gifts and you get these benefits because of being belonging to him, to being his child. So I feel like you see that, and it's just again, it goes back to the place of grace. This is what Jesus did for us on the cross. Because of Jesus, we have these gifts that he gives us. I'll let you probably break them down better.
Yeah, so the robe, it talks, the father says, but the father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. So I read one commentary and it said that finest robe in the house, that finest robe in the house would have belonged to the father. Ooh. Like that, the finest robe wouldn't have just been some random robe hanging in the closet somewhere. It would have belonged to the father. Yeah. And this is just, so again, this is a natural story, a physical story explaining spiritual things. Yeah. And so when we come to the Father, we are wrapped. There's scripture that talks about we are wrapped in robes of righteousness that identify us as belonging to God.
So Isaiah 61:10 says, I am overwhelmed with joy in the Lord my God, for he has dressed me with the clothing of salvation and draped me in a robe of righteousness. That's one.
So that's the one. And those robes in the natural, a robe, especially in a wealthy family, a robe distinguished you as family. You weren't part of the servants.
Yeah.
They had one way of dressing, but this robe, this finest robe in the house, it would have distinguished this son as being part of the family.
Yeah.
This was not the clothing of a servant. This was the clothing of a master. And so it had great meaning to in the natural, but in the spiritual for us, it's that idea of being wrapped in robes of righteousness, that as we stand before God one day, then we are not seen for the sins that we have committed, but it says that when we stand before God in that final judgment, it's like we know that there is sin. We know that we have sinned, but Jesus steps in and he wraps us in his robe.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there's a verse that says our sin is like filthy rags.
Our sin is like filthy rags, which is what this guy would have been wearing.
Yeah.
He's been working in a pig pen for the last who knows how long.
Yeah.
So he would have been literally wearing filthy rags.
Yeah.
Right? But now he is wrapped in the robe of the master. And that is what we have. When we come to before God, our sins are like filthy rags, but Jesus wraps us in robes of righteousness so that when God looks at us, he doesn't see our filthy rags. He doesn't see our sin. He sees Jesus.
And just in going back to that, like the word righteousness means right standing with God. So it means we can come to God and be in a right relationship with him. And you look at, what did this son do to earn that? He didn't do anything except to return to his father.
Yeah.
He returned and he repented, and it wasn't because of his good behavior he got it. So it goes back to like, it's grace. It's a free gift.
And so now we have the ring. He says, go and get he says, get a ring for his finger. And so these rings that they would have had in that time, it was a family signet ring. And it was used for all kinds of purposes. So obviously if somebody sees it, there's like a crest, like a seal on there.
Yeah.
That would have, people would have known what family you belong to just by looking at that ring. It was a ring. If you ever see those old movies where, they write a letter on a scroll, they roll it up, they melt some wax, and then somebody pushes a ring into it. That's the kind of ring.
We need
that
a big
we're
ring with
talking
a big
about.
B in it.
Big B, and every time we do something, we just, but that's the ring. It was a ring that literally symbolized authority.
Yeah.
But you could also say that it symbolized provision as well, because you could also, like, this son now could have gone into the marketplace. He hasn't eaten in who knows how long. Again, nobody's giving him any food. With this ring on his hand, he literally could have went into the marketplace, bought some food, and when they said, you owe this much, he goes... And he puts his ring down, he stamps something, and it shows that just charge it to my daddy.
Yeah.
Charge it to my father's house. My father's going to provide you with this. My father's going to pay the price for this. But it was a ring of authority. When he wrote a letter, you would sign that, you would stamp this in a seal, and it was sealed with the authority of that name. Everywhere this kid went, anything that he said, anything that he did, if anybody questioned him, all he had to do was hold up his ring, and it was a sign of authority. He didn't just speak in his name, he spoke in his father's name.
And you would immediately know and recognize who he belonged to.
Absolutely. And people would have recognized it.
So Genesis kind of give you the background of authority there. So Genesis 41 through 42, it's the story of Pharaoh and Joseph and Pharaoh. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. The entire land of Egypt. The Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. So it's this idea of, like, that's an example in the Bible where someone of great authority passed it and said, I now give the same authority to you. There's a lot of other ones in the Bible too.
Yeah, it just goes on and on. You see this played out. So again, the reason I'm saying this is because Jesus telling this story to these Pharisees, they all understood this language. Right. Like, that's what you always have to understand. That's why it's important to look at these details and go, why did Jesus say these things? While there is great spiritual significance to it, it was also understood from a practical point of view, which helped people understand the spiritual, which is why we tell parables, is because it illustrates something from the natural, illustrates something in the spiritual. Then the third thing, they said, go and get sandals for his feet. So in that day, many people that were in the poorer class couldn't afford shoes, and oftentimes they wouldn't allow slaves in the household or servants in the household to wear shoes or to wear sandals. And the reason for that being that, they couldn't run away. So it was either that you were poor, and now, again, this kid has spent all his money. He's wasted everything that he's had. He's left literally shoeless at this point. He has no shoes on. That's how poor he has become. But also he's coming back willing to be a servant. But the dad says, no.
Yeah.
Get my boy some shoes because he is not poor.
Yeah.
And he is not a servant. He is my son.
He's my son. Right.
And so these shoes, these sandals represent, again, he had a place to stay, a place to remain. He was part of the family again.
Yeah. To go back to the authority one, I missed a verse that's just so powerful. So not only do we know in the story that the Father is giving the Son authority, but just Jesus told us as his disciples that he's given us authority. So just to give you kind of like you really have to dwell on this one because it's amazing. But this verse, this is the type of authority that God has given us as believers. He's talking to his disciples. He says, "Look, I have given you authority over all the power of the enemy. You can walk among snakes and scorpions and crush them. Nothing will injure you. But don't rejoice because evil spirits obey you. Rejoice because your names are registered in heaven." So when he's talking about snakes and scorpions, this is spiritual. He's talking about demonic. I have given you a power over the enemy. But then I like that part where he says, don't rejoice because evil spirits obey you. Rejoice because your names are registered in heaven. It makes me think about, don't flaunt your authority.
Yeah.
Don't be like, I got daddy's ring on.
Yeah.
I can do anything I want. It's the understanding the authority that we have and then using it in a wise way and respecting that. And, but I think it fits with the story of the son because obviously, we're doing but we have to understand for our own personal lives, if I'm a son of a daughter of God and he's given me that authority, what does that look like for me? Like that other verse is a pretty powerful verse to kind of wrap our heads around. I've given you all authority over the enemy.
Yeah.
And we have to say, am I using that? What am I doing with the authority that he's given me?
Yeah. It's good. And then the last thing that the father says is he turns to his servants and he says, "Go and kill the fatted calf. Go and get the calf that we have been fattening." So again, in that day and in that culture, that had significance as well, because there was always a few choice calves that they had on reserve,
the special ones
that they would kind of keep to the side, that they were fattening up. They were getting them nice and big, nice and fat, and keeping them nice and tender, all those things. It was the choice calf. And these things were set aside specifically for great celebrations.
Yeah.
So it would be like when there was a celebration of a wedding, they would kill a fatted calf. And isn't that interesting? Because the Bible says that when we return to the Father's house, that there's going to be a wedding feast. It is going to be the marriage supper of the Lamb. When Jesus takes his people home, when we're there together in the Father's house, there will be a feast.
So I have a question for you, and I didn't do any diving into it, but I have like a question of, in this parable, and I don't know if you can answer it or not, but in this parable, like the celebration here, is that heaven? So many of these parables talk about a wedding or a feast or an invitation somewhere or this. And so it did make me wonder in this particular parable, is this the celebration of heaven, or is this something just celebrating just because of him getting saved? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the two tie together, in terms of the celebration.
You can't definitively say.
I can't definitively say. You look at the other two parables, and it's like, the sheep gets found, he brings the sheep back.
Yeah.
The coin gets found, hey, come celebrate with me.
Yeah.
And it's this picture of heaven rejoicing over a lost soul coming back to God. And then he says to illustrate another further, so you'd have to say all of them were that.
Right.
I feel like you'd have to say all of them were that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying they're not. Do you want it to be?
I just had a question. I'm not saying it is or isn't. I just had a question because I'm like, I feel like a lot of these parables are leaning towards, we're seeing a picture of heaven when it talks about the celebrating and the feast and,
I'm going to lean towards no.
Okay.
I'm going to lean towards no, and it's because of what comes next.
Okay.
Because the brother.
Right, right.
The story of the brother here. So, it's a celebration.
Yeah.
Here's where we are. It's a celebration. People are pumped. They're killing cows. They're going to eat good. Oh, also, the fatted calf, it was so fat and so big, so juicy, all right, that it was big enough to feed the entire village.
Wow.
And so this was not just a celebration within the household. This was a celebration of everybody within the village.
Right.
Which kind of gives you, again, that picture of the other two parables where all of heaven rejoices.
Well, in the coin one, she says, I've found my lost coin, and she invites her friends and neighbors. Yeah.
So it's that same type of celebration. Yeah. Everybody come celebrate because my son is back. So the party began. And then verse 25, while they're inside partying, it says, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. The older son didn't work in the fields, just so you know. In that culture, in that time, they didn't work. They oversaw. They were like the foreman, all right? It wasn't necessarily typical for the sons to be out in the field working, especially when there was a party going on. There was a great party going on. It says, when he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother's back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. And when this son of yours, now notice, he doesn't say when my brother. He won't even call him his brother.
That son of yours.
He says, when that son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he is found. So yeah, my thing in looking at that, to your question there is...
I think, honestly, that's what made me curious. The thought, is he not... Yeah.
Because the brother chooses to not go in.
Right.
There's a big party going on, and he chooses to not go in because he is immediately offended.
But definitely what you're seeing is he's not happy about his brother's salvation, rescue, whatever, coming back. He's not happy about that.
Yeah, it's again, you see sibling rivalry playing out here a little bit. And it's this mentality, again, we'll just look at it from the practical standpoint for a second. It's this mentality of the brothers like, I've played by the rules my whole life, and you've never done all of this for me. And the father's just like, his response is, son, everything I've had has always been yours. It's all yours. But my son was dead, and now he's alive. He was lost, and now he's found. And so, spiritually speaking, I this is what I think, and you can speak and see what you think too. For me, I look at this older brother as really, this is who Jesus is speaking to. He's speaking to the Pharisees. And in this story, in this parable, the Pharisees are really represented in this older brother.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that what you got?
There's my note for it.
Look at that. All right. And I think we need to be cautious.
Yeah.
Because I think it can also speak to us as Christians today, is how do we see others? I mean, there's people, how many times have you ever heard somebody say, I'm not going to go to church because of so-and-so. So-and-so goes there, or so-and-so is doing this, and because they don't like somebody else in church, or somebody else has a position that they want. Yeah. I've heard that. Maybe you haven't heard that. I'm a pastor. I've heard it before.
He's heard it all.
I've heard it all. It's like, well, you made so-and-so the youth leader, you made so-and-so the worship, so-and-so does this, so-and-so does that, and I wanted to do that, but you don't let me do that. How come they get to lead a small group and I don't get to lead a small? How come they get to do this and I don't get to do this? And it's this jealousy, this sibling rivalry, because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ. We're supposed to be, right?
Right.
But we have this rivalry that comes up that's not supposed to be there, and there's people that will stop going to church over those things. Just like in this story, the brother says, I'm not going in there. I'm not going to go in there and celebrate him. I'm not going to do that. This son of yours, he won't even call him brother. And how often, this is unfortunately what happens sometimes even, is that there will be people that, granted, have made a lot of mistakes in their life.
Yeah.
And then they find Christ. And they come in humility and repentance and become a part of the family of God. And in that moment that they receive that forgiveness, they are given a robe of righteousness. They are given the authority of Jesus. Their feet are covered. They're no longer slaves.
Because he says, quick, go get these things. It's not like it takes years and years of being a good person.
You didn't have to earn that status back. Right. It's all done immediately. And oftentimes this is what happens, I think, when sometimes in church as Christians, we can look around and go, why is the church so focused on reaching the lost? Why is the church, I know that sounds terrible, doesn't it? And maybe you haven't said it that way, but it's like, why doesn't the church do more of the things that I want?
Yeah.
Why doesn't the service go the way that I want it to go? Why is it too long, or why is it too short? Why doesn't the pastor preach on this more? Why don't they sing these songs? Why don't they do these events? Why don't they have these ministries? I want stuff that I want. And meanwhile, they're like, so I'm not, and if you don't get what you want, then you're like, well, I'm not even going to go there.
Yeah.
I'm just not even going to go there anymore because they won't do what I want to do. And you're losing sight of what it was all about. Jesus didn't come for the healthy. He came for the sick.
Right.
He didn't come to find those that were found.
Yeah.
He came to find those that were lost.
Yeah.
And that's what is even represented in the church. That's the mission of the church today is, yes, we are to have a body of believers that come together and get equipped. But what are we equipped for? To go into all the world and preach the gospel.
Yeah.
To baptize, to lead people to Jesus. And when one comes, we should be celebrating because it's not about us. It's about bringing the lost to Jesus.
Yeah. I think, again, it goes back to that understanding, why did he bring up the parables? And when you know that, when you get to this end part and you're kind of breaking down this older brother and the things that he's saying, it becomes clearer to me of, he is talking about Pharisees.
Yeah.
Because when you break it down of what the brother says, he says, I've slaved for you. Like, to me, that just speaks volumes right there, where he says, I've been slaving for you. And when I think about a slave, a person who is being made to do something, you just think like obligation. A slave does something out of obligation. They don't do something because they want to do something. They do something out of obligation. A son, on the other hand, does something out of relationship. So that first off gets me, where he's like, I've been a slave for you. Where that's how he sees himself. I've slaved for you. And he says, I never once refused to do a single thing you told me. So basically he's saying he's perfect. He's also saying that it's his works. I've worked for you. You can tell he's very works based here. Which is a very Pharisee mindset. The other thing is like, and in all that time, you never gave me even one goat for a feast with my friends. You never did anything for me. The Pharisees won't receive Jesus as Messiah. Like, they don't realize what Jesus has done for them because they're still works-based. So if they would have opened up their eyes and seen Jesus as his grace and his love and his mercy and him dying on the cross, then they would have been freed from the slavery of the law, and they could walk in that freedom and known what the Father actually did for them. But they had such a negative mindset of the Father and been like, you never did anything for us. So they're not even recognizing the Father and the Father's nature. Because when you go on, you see the Father's nature is, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours.
Right.
So the Father's like, you've always been by my side. You know me. You know me. Everything I have, everything I own is yours. The fatted calf you want cooked, that's yours, man.
Yeah.
The robes, the rings, the sandals, that's all yours, man. Like he's not understanding this all belongs to you.
Yeah.
But I really feel like you do see just this idea of the older brother had an issue because he's works based. Here's this brother that's been out living it wild and crazy, prostitutes, doing whatever. This brother who's been living the straight and narrow, he cannot accept the grace that the Father's giving him. Why? Because he's so works based. He's so, I earned this. I've been good and you're not giving me anything. And so I feel like when you see that, you all of a sudden see, yep, he's talking to the Pharisees, because the Pharisees could not accept that God was giving grace to these sinners, these
right.
notorious sinners. So you really see that it really is a struggle about the grace of God versus them saying, "Hey, we're works based. You know, we're your sons, and because we're good." You know.
And yeah, and I think in the end you see just these two approaches to God as well. So like you say, you had the Pharisees who were all works based, and I'm coming to God. In the end, they're coming to God the way that the Son came to the Father in the beginning, which was, give it to us now. It's what I deserve. It's what's mine. I want what's mine. Yeah. Right? And I want it now. Yeah. Kind of deal.
Basically pride.
Yeah. And so it's very prideful, very selfish, kind of obligated, not obligated, entitled, very entitled. And that was really the Pharisee spirit, is they felt very entitled. We are the rulers. We are the ones in charge. So honor us, glorify us, look at us, acknowledge us, right? And then you have this son who, yes, he chose to go away, and he chose to dishonor the Father, but then he came back, and when he came back humbly, and he came back repentant, and he came back not looking for things. He just came back to be with the Father. And that was all he wanted. He just wanted to come back and be with the Father. And I think for us that has to be our mentality, is we don't search for God. We don't come to God for what he can do for us. We come to God because we recognize that this is where we need to be. Right? And as a result of that, we're willing to do. I always love the way, I think it's Pastor Craig Rochelle says it this way a lot. He says, I don't work for God. I don't do for God out of a sense of obligation. I do for God because when I realize that all that he has done for me, and he gave his son for me, and when I realize that all that he has done and all that he gives to me freely, the only logical response is to give everything I have in return. Right. And I love that picture, because that's this son of recognizing how good he had it with the Father. And so he comes humbly and repentant and says, listen, I'm willing to stay a lowly servant. Yeah. Just let me live in your house. Let me be a gatekeeper in the house of my Lord, right? Right. And the Father goes, no. That's not who you are. Yeah. You are my son. Yeah. And you have authority, and you have a place here, and you are righteous, and you are forgiven, and you are made whole, and you are made holy through my son. And I think that's the picture that we have to have in all of this as well.
So Galatians 4:7 says, we are no longer slaves to sin or slaves to the law. Actually, it doesn't say that. I wrote that part. Galatians 4:7 says, so now you are no longer a slave, but God's own child. So it's this reality of we're no longer slaves to sin. We're no longer slaves to the law.
Also a song.
Yes. And it's just that we're God's children. We're his children. Yeah. Even in all these parables, that was something that stood out to me. The sheep, all those sheep, now you said the shepherd didn't necessarily own them, but all those sheep belonged to the shepherd. Yeah. They were his. The coins, they belonged, all of those coins belonged to the woman, and these two sons belonged to the Father. So you see, we are his, we're his children. And he came to seek and save that which was lost. Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think we see in this, we need to see ourselves in this, of how we come to the Father, how we come to God. but we also need to see how we interact with each other as well. And if you see somebody that comes into the church and comes into the faith, what is your reaction to them?
Yeah.
You know, it's this thing of the Father's immediate reaction was love and compassion, forgiveness, right? Immediate. Words didn't even have to be spoken.
Right.
It was an immediate forgiveness.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes we feel like people need to earn that forgiveness.
Yeah.
They need to earn our love, earn our
gosh,
compassion.
if God himself doesn't do that, why
He
in
is
the
the
world
one that has been offended.
do we think we would?
He is the one that was rejected, and yet he is the one that is quick to forgive.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of lessons to learn.
That was one of the things I wrote down, is just like, do I have a Pharisee spirit? And I think it's so easy to read this stuff and be like, no, I don't have a Pharisee spirit. But when you start to break down the things this guy said to his father, like, I think there's been points in my life where I've been like, well, this is unfair, and things like this. So it makes you more aware.
Yeah. All right. That's good.
40 minutes.
You got one for the next one?
No.
Okay.
Do you?
No. We'll so it's a surprise.
We're winging
next
it.
week, guys. Next week, still lots of parables to go. At this point, it looks like we're just going to work our way through them. So thanks for being with us once again. If you have questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know. You can comment or email us, lunchwithpb&j@gmail. Direct message us on social media. We dropped, in case you used to follow us on Facebook, we dropped the Lunch with PB&J Facebook, and just find us on our other. I got too much going on, too much social media stuff.
On our home one.
I already don't use it enough, so one more was too many. So just find Ben Booth, parentheses, Joy. She's there with me.
Well, if they're watching it, they know where it's at.
You know. All right. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next week on Lunch with PB&J.